So as Amanda mentioned, thank you for that warm welcome. And yes, it's great to see so many friendly faces. I used to live in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, co-founder and CEO of myturn.com, and previously was a co-founder of the West Seattle Tool Library. That's me in the upper left, third from the right. And I think I see at least Christina Haas here, who's also in that shot. So I've been involved with reuse, repair, et cetera. We also had a fixer group when I was there, and I'm guessing they probably still do for quite a while. The West Seattle Tool Library was officially started in June of 2010 after one of our members of the sustainability group I was on, Sustainable West Seattle, brought the idea to us in September. So at that time, we were probably one of the fastest tool libraries to actually get up and running. And we started in a garden center at a community college, which, shall we say, we quickly outgrew. I'm going to guess that this is kind of familiar to many of the folks in the audience. And, we then did eventually move into a newer space, added a little bit of a mobile unit. And as part of that work, I and some of my colleagues from my previous company, I've been in technology, basically ran a custom software company for a long while before my turn. And as part of sort of the West Seattle Tool Library, we built a platform originally called Local Tools, which I think at least some of the tool libraries in Seattle still call it that, as well as the Vancouver Tool Library, which was our second user or customer after West Seattle. And so, as I mentioned, we went from late 2009, right during the sort of peak of the financial crisis, or our last financial crisis. And I think we got things opened in about 8 or 9 months. It was pretty amazing and pretty transformational experience for me and for the community in West Seattle, just being able to basically get tools and other items into the hands of people that really needed them during a time when they were hurting. And I think we're going to see some of that now as well. So some of the big trends that we're looking at right now, we have climate and environmental damage that Sabrina really sort of started talking about and went in depth on, so I won't go too much there, although I'll talk a little bit more about climate. Also don't want to talk too much about COVID, but I think it does bear mentioning as the pandemic is really making issues around inequity worse. And there's really going to be a greater need for access to shared resources. And again, sort of to add on to what Sabrina said, say the real sharing economy and the real circular economy. So moving from our linear systems of take, make, and waste over to much greater reuse. And I'll talk about that more in a bit. And that greater reuse of products is also going to lead to a much greater need for repair. So to talk a little bit about climate pollution, C40 Cities has started doing a few years ago research on consumption-based accounting. So when you look at CO2 emissions in cities, they're actually 60% higher than currently estimated if you look at consumption-based accounting, meaning you're taking into account where, say, the energy that goes into products and other resources, where they're consumed rather than where they're made. So when you're properly looking at resource extraction, global supply chains, manufacturing, transportation, storage of items, actual use of the items, and then disposal or hopefully remanufacturing and recycling at a minimum, you're looking at basically 60% greater than current estimates. Fewer than 100 of the cities, the C40 cities, already account for 10% of global emissions. And for those cities to hit their climate goals, the average per capita impact of urban consumption in the C40 cities must decrease by 50% by 2030, which is really not that far away. On the plus side, there is a lot of hope. So the UN Resource Panel put out a report about 1.5 years ago about value retention processes like reuse, repair, and remanufacturing, which can reduce those greenhouse gas emissions by up to 99%. And this is especially when the reuse is happening locally, and basically those small loops in a more circular economy, when they happen locally as opposed to sending items back and forth across the country, you're going to get basically your maximum greenhouse gas reductions. And then SINTEF, a independent research organization in Norway, along with the International Labor Organization, recently released a report that basically says that moving from a linear, so that take, make, waste economy we have now, that Sabrina really went into detail on, to a more circular economy can lead to a 2.5% increase, or 75 million new jobs worldwide. Many of those jobs would actually be local jobs in basically the repair and reuse industries. So, we know what we need to do, and basically moving to these more local place-based sharing type programs are really what's going to be needed to address our climate and environment issues, as well as help us build back a bit better after this pandemic and this next financial crisis. So a lot of my work over the past decade has really been, how do we make things like reuse, repair, and sharing easier? That's focused on tool libraries and more general libraries of things and specialty libraries. And they really work nicely with maker spaces and skill sharing, as well as repair services, repair cafes, and fix-it groups. And basically anything that we can do to sort of remove the barriers to locally reusing items is going to be a win for basically the economy, as well as for the planet overall. And we're starting to see that growth. I'll talk a little bit about the history of tool libraries and libraries of things, although I won't go into too much detail, since I think most of you probably have a good idea. But the very first tool library, or first formal one that we've been able to find, was actually started in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, by their Rotary Club, not in the 1970s, but back in 1943. That tool library is still going. It's now part of the Grosse Pointe, Michigan Public Library. There were probably at least about a dozen tool libraries in the 1970s. I believe we had actually even found some record of a earlier West Seattle tool library, but really during the late 70s into 80s, they were much more difficult to run without technology solutions to help manage them. We saw, especially in the 80s, the really rapid rise of consumer culture and the availability of products using global supply chains, often made in places without strong environmental or labor protections, that were really just cheaper, and people would basically buy, lower quality, lower repairability, not quite as good tools and other items. So luckily, we kind of didn't forget about that joy of using those higher quality tools and those more durable tools. And during the mid-2000s, there were still a handful of the original tool libraries in Berkeley, in Columbus, and Grosse Pointe, Michigan, in Seattle, in the Finney Neighborhood Center. A number of those sort of earlier tool libraries that were started in the 70s were still around. And they really provided a seed for a new generation of tool libraries and libraries of things that have started to take off. West Seattle, West Philly, a number down in the Portland area really started to grow, and especially as we were going in, as we were hitting really the financial crisis. So sometimes just for helping improve affordable access to tools, but also looking at environmental and waste issues. And where we are now is we are seeing a growth of tool libraries and libraries of things all around the world. US and Canada, but as Sabrina mentioned, maybe not growing as quickly in Australia, but definitely growing there, as well as in New Zealand. Europe, if anything, is probably now growing faster than both the US and Canada with tool libraries and related services. Iceland, Asia, one or two in Africa, we'll see if we can get one going on Antarctica. So try to get all the continents covered, but it's really been great to see the growth all around the world of this movement towards reuse, and then often with related repair cafes and maker spaces and maker movement similarly, which are often linked to tool libraries and libraries of things. And so some trends in those reuse and sharing programs. So definitely a move toward more place-based reuse and sharing. There's been some lashback against the more large-scale corporate P2P and on-demand services. Having said that, they do have a ton of money to throw around. For example, in California, to get a proposition going to have things go their way on if having people not treated as employees, but instead as contractors, which is another issue we can potentially discuss. But some of the trends in place-based sharing and reuse, so this is tool libraries, libraries of things, we're seeing more and more organizations that are adding things like local delivery, having mobile tool libraries. Some are adding self-service. All of these things to basically help increase the access that people have to items, make it easier, remove the barriers basically one by one, to the point where it's actually easier to reuse and borrow things than it is to purchase them new. As I mentioned, that's one of our goals, and we're seeing that happen. We're trying to help make that happen. Sabrina also mentioned, seeing things like additional networks grow and helping, tool libraries of things work together. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But that's going to be, I think, key and very important, sort of sharing best practices and really helping each other. And events like this are, that Zero Waste Washington's put together along with other sponsors is really great. And then we're also seeing related innovative services. So product subscription services that really focus on reuse. So as opposed to sort of those box, order a box of stuff that you may or may not use and that just keeps piling up. But we're seeing actually real reuse subscription services where items go back when people are done with them, whether that's in clothing, outdoor gear, toys and games, and other products. And then we're also interestingly seeing a lot of these types of local place-based reuse programs across other sectors. So a lot of them now have started as nonprofits, public libraries, sort of the original sharing economy. But then we're also seeing libraries of things, tool libraries, maker spaces at businesses, universities, governments, and again, especially it's really a really rapid rise in libraries and things and reuse programs at public libraries. I think I sort of covered this already, but also I'll skip over this slide pretty quickly. But it really is everything from manufacturers to retailers to startups, social enterprises, all the way down to condos and apartments, and and all the way up through to large businesses, which I'll mention in a bit. And there are a number of models, and I think a number of these models apply both to sort of tool libraries and libraries of things, as well as to maker spaces, and even a number of the repair programs. Many are standalone, so nonprofit co-ops. I know as I mentioned, our second customer, the Vancouver Tool Library, is run as a co-op. I believe Montreal might also be. There are others that are social enterprises or businesses. Most are membership or subscription based and or offered in educational settings. Public libraries have had special collections for a while. They've really started to call them, say, libraries of things, and as I mentioned, Berkeley has had their tool library for about 25 years. There are other tool libraries like in Safety Harbor, Florida, Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and then also more general libraries of things, often a bit smaller than, say, or many of them are smaller than the tool libraries and libraries of things in this group, but it's great to see. And, again, I will pile on that we'd love to see product as a public utility move. And I think especially if, there are people from cities here and from, and or public libraries, really having that push, because you have the cascading benefits of, helping reach zero waste goals, as well as help people who are going to be hurting coming out of this pandemic with, job losses, especially low to moderate income folks. And then also, just to go back to those models, and we also see hybrid models like Sabrina mentioned in Brisbane, where you can have nonprofits co-located within a public library. That also happens in other places around the world. It was done in Toronto, few locations in Europe. So and I believe Tacoma is actually moving into a shared space in their public library. And this is great to see, at least providing those resources, even if the public library is not going to run the program itself. And some of those programs will actually use people can use their library cards with the main public library system catalog or with MyTurn, or use a completely separate account like MyTurn to manage those tool libraries and libraries of things within the public library. So I'll just kind of jump through some examples and some examples around the country, around the world. One of my favorites is actually Mother Hubbard's Cupboard. They're a food pantry in Bloomington, Indiana. They have a community garden, a tool library, where people can borrow tools to either, manage their plots in the community garden or at home. They offer classes on how to prepare healthy meals. They have a kitchen lending library to help them prepare basically those meals at home. And so it's an organization that's taking people with food insecurity, providing them a place to grow healthy food, the tools to harvest that food, and as well as the tools to prepare it. So going from food insecurity to reducing that food insecurity with healthy meals. Pretty amazing type of program that we'd love to see more of. We're also seeing, as mentioned, sort of more general libraries of things. And Sabrina mentioned that as well, where they're bringing in more home items. I know when I was at the West Seattle Tool Library, we were very liberal with our definition of a tool. And I know, and things like the cider presses were popular and are probably still pretty popular, as well as, dehydrators and other items. But there are now sharing programs that offer just about any type of item offered by nonprofits, by businesses, by public libraries. There in Seattle, there's the Smart Building Center. They have a lending library focused specifically on energy efficiency tools for doing energy efficiency retrofits. And renovations of homes or buildings. Number of public utilities in California do the same. So going back to sort of that climate issue, basically reducing consumption of tools while directly lowering greenhouse gas emissions, another sort of win-win situation. And then this is also happening at universities where students are gaining access to shared items, anything from even shared mobility like bikes, event items, as well as even games and other items or kitchen items that they might not have room for in either dorms or in smaller living spaces. And then businesses are getting in on this. So Stanley Black & Decker has both a makerspace and a tool library that basically is an employee perk. Yeti, who does outdoor items, especially coolers, has an outdoor gear lending library. And we're seeing other businesses sort of getting into this. So that way, they're sort of trying to, one, learn a little bit about offering products as a service, as well as help their employees reduce consumption and waste at business. And we want to see these types of programs anywhere they can get started. So my heart is absolutely in tool libraries and libraries of things. That's how I got started with this at the community level, but wherever people can gain access to shared products, so that way they are not having to purchase new ones, is to me win-win. And across the platform, we're seeing that this is really working. What we call sort of 10 to 100 times radical reuse, where products are reused 10 to 100 times over individual ownership. So whether it's a power drill, bikes, table saws, literally being used up to hundreds of times by over 100 and sometimes hundreds of unique people to actually get these products into better use. And obviously these are more durable and repairable items because a lot of the less expensive, less enjoyable to use, to be honest, items just don't hold up to this type of use. But when you have sort of those highly durable, highly repairable items, they become much more valuable in reuse type situations. And then I'm going to probably be coming back to this slide a bit as I go through the rest of the presentation, and I'll also share it during Q&A. But there are tons of things that can be done to sort of help build capacity, build funding. A lot of these are focused on, say, libraries of things, tool libraries, reuse programs, but are also applicable to maker spaces as well as repair type programs. So if you're looking at startup and expansion funding, some good places to do, or good ways to do that, crowdfunding. In the US, at least, if you're a nonprofit, IOB is a great platform for that. They will help also provide expertise on how to run a crowdfunding campaign. Crowdfunding campaigns can be a ton of work, potentially for not that large amount of funding, but they are also great at essentially kickstarting your marketing and social media type campaigns. So it really helps you get your messaging together. But to be fair and to be honest, they are a ton of work. Donations, straight donations, again, if you're a nonprofit, of both items as well as money, and I'll come back to that a little bit. Pre-selling membership. Grants, I'm going to go into in a little bit more depth in a bit. Of course, making sure you have a strong brand and social media, and really, especially when you're getting started, working with local media, doing outreach to traditional media, blogs, local social influencers is just really key to get your message out there, which will then help grow your initial memberships, your initial customer bases. Ongoing funding. Again, I'm going to come back. I'm going to go into membership in a little more depth in a bit. Rental use and late fees can be key. So I know that a number of, especially tool libraries, don't like to charge rental or usage fees, and that's fine. If you are basically making enough money from memberships or recommended donations as memberships, but just it is something to consider. Looking at per use fees, there are a number of tool libraries around the country, around the world, that at least for some items will charge a per use fee, even to just help cover maintenance, or even charge a per day rental fee. Much lower than a traditional rental shop, but it really helps with their financial sustainability. And then we heard a couple of other items talked about already, but I'll bring up. So workshops and classes, great community building, as well as can be a good source of revenue. It's going to be talked about, and I think in one of the breakouts, and it was talked about earlier, but what do you do with all of those items that come in? Obviously, if they're, I believe junk was the word used, you're not necessarily going to be able to sell them, but being a little more picky about the items that you accept if you can. And if they are in working condition, definitely accept donations of items, even if some tool libraries will actually primarily use new tools, so that way they have a standardized set manufacturer for what they use. But even if you are doing that, take items in working order, because you can always sell them during tool sales. And with My Turn, we're going to be adding the ability to sell items directly via the platform, along with items that are being reserved or borrowed. And then gift certificates are also a great way, and we are looking to have gift certificate functionality built into My Turn by the holidays, which are coming up. So we're hoping to do that, but even if we don't, gift certificates, gift memberships, etc., another sort of great way for ongoing funding, whether it's holidays, birthdays, etc. And it's always important to operate as effectively and efficiently as possible. So, you know, as has been kind of talked about, prefer those repairable and durable items. One, they're going to last longer. They're more valuable in shared situations. You're going to spend less time repairing them in the first place, and they will be possible to repair. It's really key to focus on member and staff engagement. So, you know, it's all, and this is going to be true of, I'll talk a little bit about grants in a moment, but basically maintaining existing members and maintaining existing staff and volunteers is always easier than trying to get new ones. So, you know, whatever you can do to sort of help keep that engagement up is great. And then, yeah, a little bit of a self-serving one, but is absolutely true, and you know, was one of the reasons why you know, tool libraries and libraries of things, you know, sort of slowed down, or many disappeared a couple decades ago. But having software platforms and automation is really key. Reducing staff and volunteer burnout. So just basically automating whatever you can. And if a platform that you're using doesn't have something you need, either, you know, contact that platform provider to suggest it, and or see if it can be integrated more directly with other platforms that are doing what you need. You know, making sure you're tracking maintenance of those the items that you have, especially you know, to keep them in good repair. That's something that can also be done through My Turn, and then just really following best practices and learning best practices, and sort of that sharing and networking. There, if you're not aware of it, there is a Lending Library Alliance that is starting up. I have a link to it in one of the last slides. It's over at sharestarter.org, but then there's also a Slack group as well as a Facebook group that I'd recommend joining if you haven't already. If you have any sort of spare time or cycles and want to help out and help manage that and help sort of really bring that to fruition, we think it would be really valuable to the community. And then last sort of topic here on building capacity and fundraising is, you know, partnerships and policy. So some of the tool libraries will get corporate and even like bench sponsors. Others, and maker spaces especially, will do commercial projects. So actually doing making, manufacturing, but even repair and renovation. So ModCon Living in Columbus, Ohio is, they were rebuilding together, so they sort of had some of this in place, but they also do repair and renovation projects. So this helps, you know, pay for staff, things like that. And one of the other things that is often overlooked, and I think is really important, and you know, organizations like Zero Waste Washington are great at this, and it's so valuable to have them. But really, advocacy and, you know, pushing on public policy. So whether it's for zero waste, whether it's adding, you know, sharing services as part of new developments and buildings. So like whether that's, you know, a small library of things or tool libraries in multifamily homes or condos, and getting that into the building code, or at least as, you know, sweeteners for, you know, for builders, is going to be, you know, critical. Because while, you know, while making it easy for people to transition to reuse is critically important, we need, you know, really broad, big pushes, and that's going to require public policy. That's going to require, you know, essentially products as a public utility. So I'm going to jump over to and go a little more in depth briefly into a few other things like membership and subscription. And again, this should apply to both tool libraries, libraries of things, as well as to things like makerspaces. I know that a number of, especially the nonprofit tool libraries, are donation based, and that's great. But definitely, and I would still recommend, offering a sliding scale or pay what you can. For most groups, from an equity point of view, we have a number of tool libraries. Again, one of them, that one in Columbus, Ohio, where I believe it's 60% of their borrowers are below 50% of the area median income. So essentially not even low to moderate, but low income folks. And a number of other tool libraries are serving those same types of populations. You can differentiate your memberships based on whether it's usage levels, number of items that can go out. And we see existing tool library membership fees ranging from free or $20 or $40 a year up to $200 a year or even $40 a month. I believe the 240 are in Canadian, so reduced by 30%, but there is a wide range of costs and a wide range to really get to financial sustainability. And again, using those sliding scale and the pay what you can to make sure you're serving everyone that you can, but then really encouraging the people that can afford it to pay more to help you, employ staff and or increase staff hours, which is going to help reduce volunteer burnout. And one idea that I don't see done often, but I think could benefit a number of both tool libraries as well as maker spaces is, so before you're opening, obviously pre-selling memberships, that's done, but then also approach businesses, local government, government agencies, power utility companies, and see if they will purchase memberships in bulk. For their staff. So if they don't necessarily have money to support you with grants, which I'll talk about briefly in a moment, see if they can get it into their budget to actually purchase memberships to help you be more sustainable and also help those businesses reach their own corporate social responsibility goals by supporting a good program and helping their employees reduce consumption and waste. And have access, to say a makerspace where they can, learn new skills and even upskill their own skills. And sort of having those partnerships, I think, can be hugely important. And if you're not already, definitely move to recurring membership models, monthly, yearly. You can still do, pay as you go on top of that. With My Turn, a lot of our, we now support, automatically recurring memberships. I'm guessing a number of folks here may not be using them because they weren't in place when you got started, but hugely, hugely important. And it basically gives you much more stable revenue moving forward. Last thing I'm going to talk about super briefly are grants. And this is foundation, government, and I should actually have corporate there. Grants are usually focused on basically startup costs and or adding new programs rather than operating funds. So, typically you're not going to be able to, survive just on grants. There are exceptions to that. There's a couple of tool libraries that have access to HUD block grants, but that's relatively rare. And basically granting agencies, especially charitable foundations, want to see self-sufficiency or at least the potential there through earned income and other diverse income sources. Especially if you're looking at foundation grants in the US, you need to have a 501c3 or your fiscal sponsor with a 501c3. Government grants can vary from that, whether it's 501c3. There are also business grants, agricultural grants, if you're maybe doing an agricultural tool library or lending program. And then just to sort of reiterate a point I made, it's always easier to retain funding than to get new grants. So stewardship and communications, whether it's with your funders, with your donors, with your members, with your staff, is just super, super important. And last thing I'm going to sort of go through here is just sort of some of the really key things for successful grant applications is, so you really need to show that the problem is significant. So whether that's, climate change, reducing waste, moving to a more circular economy, upskilling, you need to show that the problem is both significant, and then your solution, which is going to be the next part of the grant, will have significant impact. So you're going to be able to achieve, reduce that problem, improve the lives of people that you're serving, and have that impact. You need to make sure that you have a team that's qualified and can actually achieve that proposed solution. And then your program is unique, which may sound a little funny. I'm talking to a group of tool libraries, makerspaces, and repair groups, but it's at very least unique in your area. So Sabrina talked a little bit about competition in the same area. Competition can be good, but trying to, especially if you're going, you don't want to be competing for government grants in the same area. We always encourage our customers, and then even other people that we work with, our partners, and even other platforms, that we'd rather work with people in an area rather than sort of compete with them. And I think that's really key. And another big thing on successful grant applications is to raise your profile to really increase your odds of getting grants. Not always sort of officially part of it, but if people have heard of you, they see you active in the community, they see you actually already having some of that impact. So, really getting your marketing and social media game as, up and on the ball as possible, building relationship with local media, and corporate foundations, if you're going after them, especially want your programs to be highly visible. And with that, I think I want to leave some time for Q&A. So I'm just going to kind of jump through. So there are some additional resources for sort of the Lending Library Alliance. We have some resources to starting and managing a tool library or library of things on our site. Some more information from the C40 cities on consumption-based accounting and the greenhouse gas emissions of consumption, as well as how reuse, remanufacturing, and local manufacturing can really reduce those same issues of greenhouse gases. And
thank you so much, Jean. I'm sorry,
no problem.
There's a delay. I just wanted to give a minute or two for questions. So we only have a minute or two. I think we're going to start about at 11:10 for the breakout sessions. Did anyone have a question they want to unmute? And you feel free to ask.
I actually have a question about the pay as you can. The Department of Revenue is actually looking into the West Seattle Tool Library to see if we should have been collecting sales tax on our per tool rental, which is an issue that is probably going to start hitting other tool libraries. And given that most of us are in the state of Washington, I'm wondering what your opinion is on that. If that is something that you have seen come across in other states, or if our Department of Revenue is just really, really stick up the something.
Yes. Thank you for the very direct question. So especially in the US and Canada, we do have the ability to track taxes in my turn. I am not a lawyer. I'm especially not a tax lawyer, so I'm not going to offer sort of any legal opinions here. Having said that, you have the ability to do that moving forward. I would think, I'd actually, and I should have mentioned this in one of the resources. I know when we started the West Seattle Tool Library, we got a pro bono lawyer, I believe from Fenwick and West.
Yep.
If you're not already talking with them, definitely talk with them, or there are others that do that, to find out if this is something that is going to be required. It's going to be tough, and we may see more of this because of, we're going in with the pandemic. We're going to have a bit of a financial crisis that's related to it. We're already seeing that. We're going to see states and municipalities that need revenue. So they may be looking into like, how can we collect more revenue? Getting it from tool libraries, libraries of things seems like trying to get blood from a stone. They should be supporting these programs, not requiring them to be more heavily taxed, because they are essentially offering a public service. So that is my feeling on the subject, but again, that's not a legal, that's not from a legal. I have not heard of other tool libraries, that didn't set up initially collecting it. Not many do, that where Department of Revenues come after them. So I'm glad to have that warning as well, and keep me in the loop as well on what goes on there. And yeah.
Oh,
absolutely.
I will be screaming if that happens to us, because it's it goes down. But they said that the way our website is written and our paperwork is written, which was, checked by lawyers, that it does not sound like we are actually asking for donations. It sounds like we are demanding money, and that leaves me very concerned.
So yeah, last thing I'll mention there, you can change wording on your website, including where it says like a per loan fee, to say recommended donation. We do have a customer, and this might be the reason why it's actually a durable medical equipment lending library. They have it listed on like each one of their items that it's like a $20 recommended donation right on their inventory. So if that would end up helping and you do not know how to do that, reach out. And that might be a way to sort of help say, oh no, it says recommended donation now on the website.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I'm thinking of that too, Christina. Maybe we can all work together to look at our tax advisement as a community in the region. But I wanted to say thank you so much to Jean for your time and your amazing presentation. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for